Hello everybody, I'm Rob, and today we're going to be painting Trench Crusade. Like many of you, I've bought the Kickstarter for Trench Crusade, an absolutely awesome looking skirmish game, but I think what attracted me most to this game was the lore. I am a huge fan of history. My degree, or one of my degrees, are in history, and in my third year I actually studied the Crusades. So this kind of period of history where Trench Crusade kind of starts off and diverges from our normal timeline really fascinates me. I think the makers of the game have done a really terrific job about kind of enriching the lore behind this story, and I really can't wait to find out more about it. I know that Graham McNeil has done a short story which I'm really looking forward to reading, but I know that many of you will be keen and eager to get started with your projects and with your kind of war bands and your small armies. So what I've tried to do here is to create a video. It's a pretty long video, by YouTube standards, but it's going to go through two forces, or two ways that you can go about painting them. I've picked the Hell Knight and the heavy mechanized infantry models, mainly because they're nice and big, easy to paint, and you can do lots of kind of weathering on it. And then once you watch these techniques, it'll be up to you to kind of put them onto smaller models. But I think that the techniques that we're going to cover today really are techniques which are easy and accessible for everyone. So there's nothing complicated within the techniques we're going to use. In fact, we're mainly going to use dry brushing, but it's going to create some pretty cool effects. And for lots of people, what's important is that we're not going to be using an airbrush either. So if you've got a couple of brushes and you've got some dry brushes, then this will be the one for you. And I think that, like lots of projects, trying to get them off the ground, we buy into them, we're quite keen and eager to do it, and then by the time we get them, we just find that we've got no time. I think that this kind of project is perfect if you just say to yourself, I'm going to do it over a sort of a 3-hour period. I'm going to get my kind of warband done, I'm going to get this set of models done within 3 hours, and I think this tutorial, or hopefully this tutorial, is going to be able to inspire you to get them done quickly, but they're still going to look good. And as we go through the tutorial, I'll kind of give you my thoughts about why I've approached it in certain ways, but also I'll talk to you about the basing as well, where I've got the kind of the basing material from, and any other extra details that you might want to know. And as always, if you've got any questions, just leave them in the comments and I will try and get back to you as quickly as I am able. Let's begin with our new Antioch heavy mechanized infantry. As you can see, this model is an absolute beast. This has been put on a 40mm base and just been primed with white. This is an Inquisitor that I made for another video, my previous video, and you can see the size comparison. It is an absolute whopper. So dark rust, fresh rust and grim rust as well. Some of these paints are from the Fanatic range, but some of them I'm going to be using, like Midnight Olive here and grim rust as well. These are from John Blanche's new masterclass of Volume 1 and Volume 2 sets that the Army Painter have just come out with. I think pre-orders are going to be on the 10th of January, so in 5 days time, but you can see on some of my previous videos an unboxing, and then I've got some more videos dropping this month, kind of showing off these. But I just got so into Trench Crusade over the past few days and painting these models up, I was desperate to kind of slot this video into the general Grimdark series. So these effect paints are really interesting, different tones of rust here, and I really wanted to you just having a look at the artwork that we saw right at the beginning of this video. This is a war-torn, the Levant has been war-torn. New Antioch is the last bastion in the Levant, and these guys have been fighting for a very long period of time, hundreds of years, and so I wanted that kind of just that general worn grubby look to the armour. So what you can see me doing here is just taking the various rust paints that we've got, not really kind of thinking about which one I'm using. I'm just going in between them all, the grim rust, the fresh rust, the dry rust, or the dark rust, sorry. And what I'm really focusing on is the underneath of the model, all the underparts, but also between all the nooks and crannies as well. You could, if you had an airbrush, just airbrush this if you wanted to. But the only thing I would say is that the rust effects paints are quite bitty. There's obviously bits in them because, you know, to simulate rust. So just be careful when putting them through the airbrush. You could use alternative kind of like orange browny colours from the Fanatic range if you wanted to. But I specifically chose the effects paints because I wanted that kind of grimy look to the armor, but also that textured look to the armor as well, as if like every time it's gone into battle, it's come back, then they've repainted it. So I wanted a lot of texture to this armor rather than just kind of like smooth blends. Dry brushing helps with this to create texture, but also using these effects paints helps to create texture as well. And you can see here I've left patches of kind of the white left behind, and then from there we'll just build up our Midnight Olive. Now the Midnight Olive is one of the new John Blanche paints, and this is now the darkest colour within the olive greens, or the darkest colour within the flexible triads. And what you can see me doing here is just taking my dry brush and just building that up over our rust colours. So a lot of the rust colours I will cover up with this dry brushing, but lots of it I will not be able to get to because of the way that I'm just stippling and avoiding and leaving the nooks and the crannies behind where the rust has built up into. But also we can start to build this transition between the rust within the shadows and then the green from the top as well. So number one, it's stylistic, and then number two, it's kind of realistic in the sense that the rust is just ingrained deep within the armor. The other thing I think to consider here is about contrasting colors. I was conscious that I wanted to use some contrasting colors. So olive green is certainly not a direct contrast to oranges. Blue would be a direct contrast to oranges, and that's why you often see movie posters in blues and oranges. So next time you're looking at movie posters, see how often blues and oranges kind of come up because they're directly contrasting. But green is still a cool color, going against the warm oranges and brown. So we've still got some color wheel contrast here. In terms of the colours, so that was a really important factor for me in kind of choosing these particular colours. I think the artwork that we've seen, the new Antioch, tend to be in greens, but I think that you could do blues quite nicely as well. Before I started, I was looking at the heraldry of Bohemond. He was the first prince of Antioch, the original Antioch. That was taken by the Crusaders. I think it was Bohemond, and his heraldry is in blue, so you could always do the armor in blue, I think, and I think that would be a good reference to kind of historically when the Crusaders took Antioch. So next up, and this color is army green. So again, this is within the flexible triads. This is an olive green as well, and it's just like the next kind of two colours up from Midnight Olive now. And what you can see me doing here is just building up the volumes in the armour, leaving certain places that Midnight Olive colour, and just thinking about where the light would hit. So it's not all one kind of like uniform colour, we're also focusing on the volumes and where the light would hit, just to make it a little bit more dynamic and a little bit more interesting as well. And then next up, we're going to move to Olive Drab. So this is again a olive green colour within the flexible triad. However, it is a much lighter colour. So all these colours are within those flexible triads, so they're a natural progression on one another. So you guys don't have to think about kind of your colour mixing here or selecting different colours. If you just use the same colours within the triad, then it'll be a natural progression. If I also got my knowledge wrong about the Crusaders, it's been about 20 years since I studied them, so do forgive me. But yeah, so it might be worth, if you're thinking about creating like a colour scheme for your for new Antioch or whatever scheme it is, it might be worth having a look at some of the heraldry of the original Crusaders during the First Crusade, when the principalities were first taken. So there's obviously, well, there was the Principality of Jerusalem, but obviously during the Trench Crusade that was completely destroyed. And then there's a few, Acre as well was taken, and then Antioch was taken as well. And then what you can see me doing here, just with a brush, just using some stippling, just using this olive drab just to build the final tippity top highlights. We don't want it to be super refined, these highlights. We do want, stippling is the perfect way to go about this. So you haven't got a steady hand or worry about smooth blends, then this is the kind of like perfect project for you. This is not a smooth armor in any way, shape or form, but it does allow you to practice kind of your volumes and the way that lights hit, say, like curved surfaces. This is a really great model actually to practice those skills, just because of the really nice curves on it, and the lots of cylinders and cones on this model for you to be able to practice that. And you can see me just going back in with a dry brush, just going backwards and forwards. That was actually a wedged makeup brush, that one. Right at the start of this, I was using the Army Painter kind of the round dry brushes, but I just needed a kind of like a flatter point, so I just went between the makeup brush and the Army Painter dry brush there. So next up, you can see here, this is our dry rust colour that's just been thinned with an awful lot of water, and so I guess you would describe this as a wash, really. And what I'm doing is I'm just going into the shadows and just kind of glazing this in, just to bring back a little bit of colour into the shadows, and just creating more rust where I think it's appropriate to have more rust. Perhaps I've gone a little bit overboard with the green, between armor plates, so I just go back in with this glaze. I can add a little bit more effects paint to it if I want to, just if I feel I need to build it up in certain places. And then you can always go to that fresh rust or the grim rust as well, just to add in little tones as well. But I'll put some pictures up on my social media, so if you're trying to like copy this exactly, you can always have a look at those pictures, and then you can kind of get a better view and a still view of this model. This really didn't take long at all. I would say it probably took about an hour in total to paint this, with the build taking maybe like another hour, and then a few hours to dry, because I used milliput on the base. In terms of the base, I used parts from Make It Epic. They have a lot of stuff on their social media if you want to go check this out. This is not a sponsored post for Make It Epic. It's just simply where I got the 3D printed bits from. The skulls on the sticks I thought were really nice. The crosses, like the graves, I thought were really, really cool. And then they gave me some craters as well. And then you can use like sand or textured paint or whatever for the basing. And I just slotted all these things into kind of like milliput, and then build it up from there. So next up, we will cover the base of the second, but I've just put all the model parts just all together. Next up, I'm using heavy metal, which is one of my new faves from the John Blanche range, which is a very, very dark metal, and just dry brushing any silver parts, so the chainmail and this halberd, the two ends of the halberd with this. As you can see though, I basically painted it with this rust colour. So we're kind of like working backwards to how we might usually work, and then just dry brushing it with some silver. And then we're going to use True Blood and then Matte Black. We're going to mix those together, probably in about a 4-to-1 mix, 4 parts blood to 1 part matte black. I did start off with just True Blood, and then I thought it was too red. I thought, if this guy's going around killing heretics, I kind of in my head had their blood as more blackened and cursed, so I think just adding a little bit of black to that True Blood just makes it, I don't know, feel like it should you know, if he's been killing Hell Knights, for example, I kind of imagine their blood to be more black than true red blood. Right, molten lava and dark rust. We're going to mix those two together. Molten lava is my kind of go-to orange color, and we're just going to thin this down a little bit, because what I want to do now is to make some streaks from the armor. So there's a number of dents in this mechanized infantry model, and then it's great because you can just pull your kind of like rust streaks down from those parts, and it's kind of sketched out really nicely for you already. This is obviously very, very orange. I understand that some people will want darker orange, so just use more of the dry rust, but I wanted mine to be quite orange. Sorry, use more of the dark rust. You can just pick rivets and things like that and just wash this all over it as well if you want to. So far it's looking pretty good for what's essentially just dry brushing and stippling. Okay, so onto the base. So brownish decay. We're going to use that on all the skulls. If you wanted to leave the skulls just with brownish decay, then that'd be absolutely fine. I think it works really, really well for like a trench style 1914 base. However, if you do want to refine it, we'll go through refining it a bit. Next up, dark wood. Dark wood we're going to apply very, very liberally. So we're going to apply this all over the base and all over any kind of like sticks, things sticking out, and also the cross, the makeshift grave as well. Any metal parts like the end of spikes and things like that were painted exactly in the way that we did the halberd, which is just applying our rust effect paints quite liberally, lots of different tones within there, and then just dry brushing it with heavy metal. We don't need to do too much on the base really, because I've got this idea, you know, of muddy trench style bases. You know, if you have a look at photos of 1914 to 1918, you'll be able to get a general sense. I've gone for kind of more of a wet mud, but you could go for something more dry. You could even dry brush it as well, but I've gone for something more wet. The skulls, they have been highlighted with some dusty skull, and then if you want to, you can further refine that by adding a little bit of ivory white from the new John Blanche paint set to the dusty skull, just to add a little bit more refinements, a few more highlights, but you don't need to do more than highlighting it with dusty skull if you don't want to. As I said before, I think this is about trying to get your warband, your force together as quickly as possible, so you can game with it as quickly as possible. I think this is, you know, what I want to try and show you with these videos, that you can get good effects with relatively simple techniques. Right, next up we're going to use Army Painter's Gloss Varnish. We're not going to use this, despite the fact it says air on it. We're actually not going to use this through the airbrush. I'm trying to avoid using the airbrush on these particular sets of videos for you guys, just in case you guys don't have access to an airbrush. And what I'm doing here is the base is just, I'm just applying Gloss Varnish all over the base, just to give it this kind of like wet mud look. I don't really apply it to the sticks and things like that, but you could do if you wanted to. If you think it's a sodden, maybe it's just rained, for example, or it has been raining, so you could apply gloss to the wood or whatever, just to give that kind of like shininess to it. And then this is our new Antioch heavy mechanized infantry model. That's it, that's all finished, all done and dusted. So pretty good results for something that didn't really take that long. Right, onto our Hell Knight next. So this was really interesting. So these guys here are from the Court of the Seven-Headed Serpent. So I imagine this from Hell itself. So I really wanted a kind of like an inner glow, but also something that was going to be relatively quick to do, rather than me trying to do OSL on every single model that would take me forever. So what I've done is combined a drop of fiery vermilion with power no glow. So power no glow is, I guess it's a magenta color, ready magenta, and it flows. It's got some flow to it because these are designed to almost be glazes. You go through the airbrush to where you've done kind of airbrush highlights. So just adding some fiery vermilion just makes it more red, but also adds a little bit of bite to the overall paint as well. So if you're looking for a kind of fluorescent red, this is probably the way I would go about doing it with these, combined with these paints. Now I want kind of an inner glow to this model, something that you think this guy is evil. He's glowing red amongst his armor, or inside his armor. He has been tainted by hell, and the demons and the fallen angels within it. So we're going to start off with that red color over a white primer, and the white primer just allows it to be as bright as it can be. So we've got matte black and then our fiery vermilion. Again, our fiery vermilion is a color within the new John Blanche paint set. And what you can see me doing here, again, we're using dry brushing here, and I'm just dry brushing this kind of mix of black and fiery vermilion all over our model. Now, something I would suggest is actually not gluing it to the base in the way that I have done. I was really conscious as I was dry brushing this that I was going to knock my spikes and my kind of grave markers over. So I would actually do this off the model and then stick it on a little bit later, and just leave some, press the feet into the milliputs just so you know where he's going to be. But I was really conscious that I had to be quite careful with this. Anyway, so we're going to go around and we're going to basically dry brush this, and as we go further on, we're going to add a little bit of black in every time. So we're just going to keep on adding a bit of black, a bit of black, a bit of black, until we get to pure black, which you're going to see in a moment. I've got a slightly longer brush here. This is just a makeup brush. I did go back and forwards between using the Warpaints dry brushes and these makeup brushes, and you can see here this is basically pure black over our model now, and we're just dry brushing. You can see me really going for this kind of like downwards motion, trying to leave as much as the red in the nooks and crannies as possible. And this just starts to create a really simple kind of like inner glow. It's like a reverse highlight. I don't think you need to worry too much about getting this precisely right. These are quite busy and complicated models. You could spend a very, very long time painting every single one very carefully, and sometimes it's just the general overall effect that we want to go for, rather than kind of spending ages on one particular model. So trust in the process. I know at the moment it doesn't look like much, but it will look much kind of stronger and a bit more sophisticated a little bit later. So this is basically just pure matte black now. Right, next up we're going to use the darkness again, another new John Blanche paint, or should I say a paint from John Blanche's masterclass set, and again this is just dry brushing this on. I've used a smaller dry brush here, and this is a wedge dry brush, like a makeup brush. That's specific. I needed something slightly pointed for this next step, which is why I've decided to go for this kind of makeup brush. The rounded brushes from the army painter were perfect for the kind of like the Antioch model because of the particular shape, but this is quite, lots of these shapes are quite awkward, so you know, having a flatter brush is slightly easier. And you might be asking yourself, okay, well, why is he using the darkness? Why is he using essentially a desaturated blue? So again, if we think about color theory, red is a warm color. Yeah, this is a very hot red color, and then blues are on the opposite side of the color wheel. Now they're not directly opposite, as we literally had just spoken about. Orange would be directly opposite, but it is still a contrasting color. Colors don't have to be directly opposite to be contrasting. We've got a warm and a cool color here. So what I'm doing is I'm using blue highlights in the top part, and then you've got red in the shadows, and then this will create quite an interesting color contrast within our model. And what we're doing now is, and what you might have seen me do just then with the dry palette there, is add just a touch of ivory. So we're just lining this up every time. We're just building it up, building it up, building it up, and adding a little bit of ivory every time just to build up those blue highlights. Because it's a desaturated blue, the highlights are going to look like a blue-grey in the end. By the time we added a little bit of ivory to it, they're going to look like a blue-grey. Okay, so we've got further along in the process, and now we're just we've added a little bit more ivory to the mix, and we're just doing our final tippity top kind of highlights with this dry brush here. And as you can see, it really is kind of like a desaturated kind of bluish color now. It's desaturated because it had black in originally. It's very dark blue, and then we've added just white into it, so it's quite pastely, quite what would you describe as desaturated. But you can see the contrast between this kind of like blue highlights in the top and then this red in the shadows, so it looks much more interesting than it did. I think if you were to look at the initial process when we were just dry brushing it black, I think you would have been like, oh, what, this does not look good at all. But actually now we started to do this, I think that it's started to come together, and I think it's one of those classic cases where the overall model is greater than the sum of its parts. Like, each of these techniques that we're using are not very sophisticated or complicated. They can be achieved by most people, but overall the model looks decent. And I think that if you had like a war band together, a little force together, you can imagine it looking pretty good. And sometimes with just a force with a coherent color scheme and coherent basing, just looks greater than the sum of its parts, I think. That's why people are always really impressed by just an army, even if it's not the best painted in the entire world. It's just an impressive thing to look upon when something's coherent and based all together and similar. So that's the kind of the theory I was going for this. So next up, we're just going to do some specular highlights, basically some tippity top highlights, the furthest away, particularly focusing on like the chainmail, corners, parts where I think the light would hit. Just this kind of like tippity top highlight. I wouldn't describe this as a non-metallic metal, but I think that it's got some of the attributes of non-metallic metal, these tippity top highlights. But I think that if you spoke to any non-metallic metal masters, I think they'd be like, no, it's not non-metallic metal. But you can see what I'm trying to accomplish. Just some specular highlights just with this almost pure ivory. I think you need to feel comfortable and confident, trying to combine the two words together. You need to feel comfortable and confident about applying these highlights and how bright you want to go. So yeah, right, next up, so I've done the base in exactly the same way that I did the base for our new Antioch miniature. So there's no differences there. The skulls have been done the same, and in fact the skull, I've used exactly the same paint on the skull that I've used on the sandbag here. But what I am doing is I am taking that original red mix that we had, the mix between Fiery Vermillion and Power Node Glow, the effect paint, and I've thinned this down with water. It is already quite thin, so bear that in mind. Like Power Node Glow is a thin paint already, but I've thinned it down with a little bit of water, and what I'm just doing here is I'm just glazing it around the base of the model, around the skulls where it will hit, and any other areas where I think it will hit. I don't think you need to go mad with this, just a gentle glow around the model, it hitting particularly the things that are white, the sandbag, the skulls, any metallic kind of edges, I think will look pretty decent and pretty good, just to give an atmospheric feel. Don't get too hung up on it not looking exactly right. I think that is just the worst thing you can do with OSL. You just want a general vibe that the things that he is moving around is almost being corrupted. That's the kind of like vibe I wanted to go for here. He's moving through the battlefield, through the trenches or whatever, and the things that he's touches have been corrupted by his kind of like inner light. So yeah, don't worry about it too much, don't focus on it too much. I just think that just having a nice glow surrounding it is quite nice. You don't have to do a glow, but I just wanted to show you guys some techniques here. And you can build it up, you can add a bit of ivory into the Fiery Vermillion and Power Node Glow mix if you want to just do any kind of like edges and corners, particularly parts that are metallic, doing those in kind of just mixed with a little bit of ivory and those points and things works well. Those barbed wire and stuff like that just works well. As I say, it's greater than the sum of its parts. I think the techniques are not too complicated really, but I think it looks pretty good, and actually would be a quick way to do like a Heretic Legion force, or alternatively a Court of the Seven-Headed Serpent force, just because it's quick and easy and looks fairly menacing. So there we have it. There we go. That's our Hell Knight. Looks pretty gnarly, pretty cool. And I hope this was relatively straightforward to understand, and hopefully everybody here can achieve those. So I hope you guys have enjoyed the video. I hope it's been useful for you. If you haven't yet painted any of your Trench Crusade models, I hope that this gives you some inspiration. Just remember, you can use simple techniques to create something that still looks pretty good. And remember that sometimes these things can be greater than the sum of their parts. A unified force combined with a cool coherent basing scheme sometimes still looks good, and I would give yourself a limit on time about how long you want to spend on kind of your warband, and then you want to get playing it as quickly as possible. I hope you enjoyed this video. Thanks to the Army Painter for sending me the paints to be able to create this video, and for their support as well. If you enjoyed it, please leave a comment, and don't forget to subscribe as well. I'm trying really hard to grow the channel at the moment, and it'd be great to have your support for that. Take care guys, and see you on the next one.